Hello and welcome to Parrot Analytics' sixth annual Global Demand Award. Today, I am joined by Narendra Reddy, COO of the Africa channel. Thank you so much for being here today. So appreciate it.
Absolutely, Brandon. Pleasure being here.
So just to start off, for those who may not know that are watching, you earned a Bachelor of Science in Production Engineering from Anna University in India. And that is an institution that has produced a long list of successful entertainment industry professionals. How, if at all, do you think the university's motto, progress through knowledge, has helped cultivate a track record of those such as yourself that contribute to quality global storytelling in one way or another?
Well, I wasn't aware that our engineering college, which was Anna University that I went to, had generated entertainment professionals. I thought I was unique in that. Their motto is progress through knowledge. And subsequently, I was at the University of Missouri that says, let the welfare of the people be the supreme law, which is their motto. And then finally, when I came to UCLA and their motto was, let there be light, all those mottos should have coaxed me to become a lawyer or an engineer or a doctor. But instead, much to the chagrin of my very traditional Indian family, I decided to go into storytelling to make an impact. Though I do believe my experience in both engineering and the arts has led me to this place where I am, where I think I function best when I'm in the nexus of both the creative industries and the business side of entertainment.
I think that's amazing. And you're building these bridges that so need to be built between different communities. And you know what? I hear you. When I was 15, my parents sat me down and said, you can't make a career out of watching TV, because I was such a proud couch potato. And here I am today interviewing you about that very subject. So I think we might have gotten the last laugh on that front.
There you go. I don't subscribe to the starving artist phenomenon. That's what I've been telling myself.
I think it's a fair self-motto right there. So according to Parrot Analytics data, global demand for non-English content has increased by more than 16% since 2018 through the first half of this year, while demand for non-English content in the US has leapt more than 50% over the last 3 years. Beyond just the proliferation of streaming services providing new access points to international programming, what do you think is driving this spike in this newfound interest?
You're right in saying that. I think global streaming services have definitely played a significant role in allowing audiences to, cross the language and cultural barrier. But I do believe it has also brought light to the fact that the US has lost some of this freshness, and frankly, a lot of the content that had been developed here had felt very derivative because, and primarily driven by executives not taking enough risk, so the air was filled with, variations of Law and Order and CSI or Real Housewives. And some of the most exciting new content seemed to have been evolved outside of the continent, outside of America. And I do think the other contributing factor is the quality of production and sort of aesthetic sensibility has been evolving globally. Some of it, of course, helped by the streaming companies that have increased budgets in local markets. But by the fact that there are just more interesting stories around the world.
Yeah, I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. I'm as big of a fan of procedurals as the next person, but there's only so many versions of Law and Order, CSI that I can sit through. I think we're going to run out of major markets to the point where it's going to be CSI Tuscaloosa, and we're going to get down to those small nitty-gritty towns.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing that's a contributing factor is that there's so much of emigration going around in the world, right? People are moving from one part of the globe to other parts of the globe. So with them, they are still wanting to have some kind of connection back to their country of origin. And so that's one of the big reasons why this type of content, particularly the kind of content that we produce on our channels, is starting to gain resonance because people are not seeing it being offered from the local markets.
Yeah, and you mentioned just now moving around. Previously you've served as general manager for DreamWorks Animation India. You led Ready or Not Entertainment as president, where you helped develop the US Kids TV channel, Kubo, and supervised the Saturday Morning Kids block. on NBC. Through all genres are different. But was there anything you've learned with your extensive track record in kids programming that applies to the wide array of scripted and unscripted general entertainment that the Africa Channel provides?
Well, for one, kids have the shortest attention span, and I think programming for kids certainly is a good training ground to program for increasingly attention deficit general audiences that we now speak to. Though most of my experiences at NBC and DreamWorks even has been in the kids and family space. So a lot of the content that we've been developing, particularly at DreamWorks, were designed for co-viewing. And I think that has specific relevance to what we do at the Africa Channel, because we're a fairly broad demographic network, though culturally specific, right? So we part of the appeal for our shows is that it needs to appeal to grandmothers as well as children. But the one thing that it has made me very aware is that there is a shortage of culturally relevant and authentically relevant content specifically for kids in this space, multicultural content for kids. And we're hoping to rectify that both from a content production and development distribution perspective.
It does seem like there is a void that needs to be filled on that front. And particularly from the distribution perspective, the Africa Channel is available on cable through deals with Comcast, Charter, Cox Communication. Your Demand Africa brand is both an SVOD service and available on FAST platforms such as Zumo Play, Pluto TV, and Tubi. So I am curious, what are the biggest advantages of emphasizing this type of non-exclusivity when it comes to distribution?
Well, if you look at it from a content producer side, the business of exclusivity for content that has already been monetized doesn't help, because the more the content is widely distributed, the argument would be that you would be able to make more money. From where we are as distributors, we don't have the luxury of having exclusive content, only because we're still a growing platform and without the deep pockets that the global streamers have. So the way we have enticed licensors to give us their content is by telling them that it can be essentially non-exclusive. And what we do is create a collective community where you'd come to the Africa Channel to see content that you identify with. So exclusivity is not a big issue for us. I do believe, though, that in the long run, as a content producer, the concept of windows, which used to be very much prevalent in the cable world, is going to apply to the streaming world as well. The big advent of fast channels right now as the answer to everything is not really relevant to new content, because the CPMs are so low at the moment that you really can't monetize original content directly on fast. I know Freevee has done some exceptions with the jury show and stuff like that, but most of the content that you see on fast channels are content that is from past libraries.
Right.
So I do believe there needs to be exclusive windows in the paid space before distributing them into the free space, in order for content producers to monetize their investment.
It does seem as if we're inching our way slowly but surely back to recreating all of the linear models just over the internet. So obviously the windows of monetization are huge elements of that. And just kind of sticking with this theme for a second, what are the criteria you do consider when deciding on the optimal distribution pathways for specific content? Are you thinking about matching target audience demographic to platform? Are you thinking about driving subscription growth? Is it a combination of all factors, so you're playing kind of 3D chess while juggling all at the same time?
No, you're right. I mean, one of our strategies is the fundamental recognition that one size doesn't fit all, right? Particularly Black and African diaspora audiences are not monolithic. They have, some people like to view content with, not pay for it. Others don't mind paying for it, but they want to binge watch. Others want to have a lean back, a programmed experience. And the good thing about what we've created is we run the gamut. We have a traditional cable offering through the Africa channel. We have a subscription video on demand offering, as well as a free ad-supported streaming offering. And the way we program those vary as well. I think on the cable channel, most of the shows that we have are daily shows like our morning espresso show, news shows that are time dependent, and more of our premium content that is advertiser safe. That's what informs what we have on our cable channel. Our subscription video on demand platform is more suited for long-running soaps and movies and series that people want to binge watch on demand. And the fast channel, we often use it for content that people like to play in the background, a series of cooking shows or a series of music shows. And then we also use our FAST platform to introduce people to content that they may not be familiar with. And once there is an appetite for that, then they can move over and watch it on the subscription platforms.
It reminds me of how Hollywood underestimated the diversity of distribution and preference taste in India, and how you guys are kind of reverse engineering this from the right way, because there are very cultural specific topics and very medium specific regions where the preferences are not all the same. It's not monolithic, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I'm to zoom out for a second, and excuse me, you can hear the dog barking in the background. I apologize.
No problem.
To zoom out for a second, at what stage of the content creation process, particularly when designing the programming that you do that's designed to go global, are the stakes the highest? Is having a solid script the most essential component to making a good TV series? Or are there other elements that prove to be deciding factors at different intervals of the process?
Well, scripting for sure. I mean, it's the one thing that has sort of held back the development or the greater appetite for African content. It always surprises me why 54 countries that make up the continent still haven't found their as much of a visibility in the global media space as, say, many of the other international players. Scripting is for sure a big piece of it. However, I think having recognizable formats is one way to sort of bridge the divide between the familiar and the unfamiliar, both from the scripted side as well as the unscripted side. The problem we've faced with format holders, recognizable format holders, is they're very restrictive in terms of where and how formats can be distributed outside of the native territory where they have been given the rights. It's one of the reasons why we haven't been able to get a lot of very recognizable format shows that were produced in Africa in the US, because that's off limits to formats that have been produced in Africa. Interestingly enough, one of the other things that are very, at least for further developing African content, the thing that holds it back, interestingly, is sound. Sound, for some reason, sound design and sound editing in a lot of the shows that have been produced in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, have not caught up with the rest of the world. And so there's a great opportunity for that. And then also editorial style and pacing, both of those are important, I think, to allow content to be consumed globally. A lot of the content in the past from India and particularly from Africa tends to be edited in a pace that's very slow. I think increasingly international audiences, global audiences want quick-paced, fast cuts, things like that, and I think those are some of the things that eventually have to be worked on for content to be accepted globally.
So, like all industries, there are various markets across the world that aren't necessarily on equal developmental footing. There's still time to go to improve in this area, have these people match these, a lot of different scenarios.
That's correct. Yep.
So, kind of sticking with this zoomed out perspective, at a time when content budgets are stabilizing industry wide, companies are cost cutting, and overall production is expected to decline in the coming years, how can global content providers keep pace with Hollywood?
Look, I don't believe Hollywood has ever been the arbiter of cost-effective production, and US
Fair.
budgets have never been commensurate with the audiences that they intend to reach. Um, I don't personally believe that content creation is going to decline per se. I think technology is evolving both from a development and production perspective, whether it's the use of cell phones for filming to AI for scripting and editorial, all of which are going to, I think, naturally going to keep costs of production going down. Increasingly, also content consumption is increasing globally outside of the United States. So no longer is the US a required market to get a show into production. So for those reasons, I think despite the cost-cutting pressures and that not affecting just the entertainment business, but all other businesses, I think content production is still going to have a pretty significant part of the economy.
Well, you are right to call out Hollywood for perhaps the imbalance of budget versus reach, which has been a plague for quite some time. I'm curious though, from researching kind of which titles to license, attempting to build a complete content library of licensed and original programming, and deciding which platforms to partner with. How, if at all, does data play a role in your business and decision making, particularly as you navigate what we're talking about here, which is a rapidly changing landscape?
Look, I am an engineer by training. I'm naturally drawn to data-driven decision making. However, in building businesses, I've also begun to develop a healthy disregard for data as well, and realizing intuition and an appetite for risk, i.e., making decisions without complete data, are just as important. One of the things I'm constantly warning my team is, the dangers of analysis paralysis or driving by looking into the rearview mirror. Having said all of that, one of the challenges we face is that so much of our content is also, particularly on the OTT side, on the streaming side, is distributed by third-party platforms. We have, for example, our subscription video on demand platform is carried on Amazon and on Roku. Neither of those platforms really give us much data that would be beneficial to make programming decisions. It's one of the reasons why we have decided to invest more to building our owned and operated platform and build a direct connection with our audience. Even on our cable side, data companies like Nielsen and others, they have some limitations in their data capabilities for emerging businesses like ours. Unless you have a fairly wide distribution, it's harder to get the kind of information that is useful for us to make informed decisions. So hopefully that's changing, but I think in the long run, developing a direct connection with our audience and using that data, have more direct data is the way for us to ultimately thrive as a business.
Now, you touched on this a little bit up top, but just to expand, you've previously said in public interviews that South Africa and Nigeria are among the market leaders in terms of African production hubs. I'm curious, what about these regions sets them apart in terms of their entertainment output from the rest of the content? And what are other countries doing to close that gap and catch up?
I think Nigeria, by volume, by far has the largest market, only because they have a very active local market that consumes their content. South Africa's has the quality of South African productions are far superior, though, and primarily because South Africa has been a locale for years, where international productions have gone into play, and so the quality of the talent has sort of kept up to global standards. Nigeria is starting to improve their quality as well. Kenya and Ghana are two countries that are upcoming. Kenya is, as you may or may not know, is increasingly becoming, getting to the forefront in the animation sector.
Mm-hmm.
Ghana is another country that is actively seeking out investments into their production and media businesses, and both those countries, hopefully in the next couple of years, are going to increase. However, having said all of that, there are still big challenges for growth on the continent.
Right. So in navigating those challenges, I think that leads nicely into this next question, because in 2021, when you were asked what are the single biggest obstacles facing the African scripted industry, you said resources, training, and access. Now that we're a couple years removed from that, would your answer to that question change at all?
Well, it's all relative. I think the amount of resources are definitely increasing. Netflix and Amazon, as you know, have now made a pretty significant play in Africa. So they're investing a lot more into content. I still believe, though, that training and collaboration are key things that need to continue to be encouraged. You know, one of the things to remember about Africa is it's not a country. There are 54 countries, and no individual country is sort of economically strong enough to support a thriving media industry. So increasingly, I think pooling resources among countries, from a Pan-African perspective, developing collaborations with international partners is critical. Sadly, I think the streamers, even though they have been making some inroads into investing more on the continent, because for the need to get the headlines, and the mantra that's being used by a lot of them is, local productions. The problem with local is that content doesn't resonate globally. And I think increasingly there needs to be a push for local but global, meaning that they need to make content resonate outside of the territory. Otherwise, the quality is always going to be, kept minimal, and that has to change.
Yeah. So to that end, you have previously written that the channel's mission is to open a daily window into modern African life, and in the process, help demystify Africa for viewers globally. So how specifically do you think the Africa Channel has gone about accomplishing this goal? And within that, what role do you think entertainment media plays in shaping social and cultural perceptions of, differing people who may not look like us, who may not come from the same places?
We try. We continue to program and promote content on both our channel and OTT platforms that provide a more holistic view of Africa and the global Black diaspora, whether it's in fashion, food, lifestyle, travel, or music. The more recent movement and rise of Afrobeats in the music sector has been, sort of opening up channels there. And then the more recent return to Africa movement for Black Americans connecting back with their heritage have also sort of opened the doors for, a fresh look at the continent from a different perspective. We have also been playing another role in opening up the Brazil market. As you know, the Brazil population is about 52% now that are Afro-descendant. And next year, there'll be some news from our side where we're launching a pretty comprehensive partnership to further build a African media industry in Brazil to speak to the Black African diaspora. We still have a long way to go. Having said all of that, we still have a long way to go. The amount of business that is conducted between the US and Africa is still woefully minuscule. And I think this continues to be largely tied to the sensational negative news that often gets more attention, and more positive, holistic stories tend to get buried. I do believe that the media industries in general can play a big role, particularly to build cultural bridges between Black Americans and their heritage, for sure.
Absolutely. And it seems that each show, not to be overly dramatic, but is a potential window into a new lifestyle, a new type of person, a new culture with its rich traditions and preferences that bring people closer together. They don't separate us. And we suddenly realize, no matter how different our upbringings and backgrounds might be, we have so much more in common than we do different. And I think quality storytelling, themes that resonate universally, like the Africa Channel is putting forth, is part of that. And kind of on that front, African Royal, Asylum, Backhand, Escape with Nate, a lot of good programming coming out of your sector already. But are there any upcoming titles you're particularly excited about that you want to tease to audiences?
No, you hit on one of them. The most recent one that we just launched was African Royale. I think one of the things, the challenges that we have in terms of content is there's a lot of content about what's going on the continent, but not enough about what the African diaspora is doing globally, whether it's in the UK or Brazil or even in the United States, right? And so about how Africans have emigrated from the continent, what's going on in their lives. And African Royale is a good example of that type of show that follows this beautiful Nigerian woman who is from Nigerian royalty, but has made Los Angeles her home, and how she navigates being an African in America. So those types of shows. Next year, we'll be announcing a new dating show with a twist called Friends Know Best that we're looking forward to early in the year. But most of our interesting development, because the economics of our distribution platform doesn't allow us to do a lot of sort of higher end original programming, a lot of the more interesting shows that we are developing are really designed for third parties under our production banner, the Africa Channel Studios, TAC Studios. And we've developed a slate of wonderful scripted and unscripted content, most of them being co-productions with large production companies, both in the UK and the US, which we'll be taking to market next year. So stay tuned for that, because we're very excited about a slate of content that have been sort of, addressing this gap between of creating African and African specific content that can speak to the global aesthetic. That's as much authentically African, but has a global aesthetic to it. So that's the slate of content that we've developed, and hopefully we'll have some success in that in 2024.
Well, as a proud couch potato, I can tell you I am very excited to see all that's coming. And if you're taking applicants for the dating show, I want to throw my hat in the ring right now. I'm trying to get in there early. Now, you've touched on it a bit in this conversation, but what is one thing you think entertainment media focuses too much on, and one thing it doesn't focus on enough?
I mean, I'd largely say there's, given the explosion of streamers whose focuses on subscribers and eyeballs, I think there's a little bit too much of focus on quantity over quality. I think most importantly, I think programmers are not willing to take enough risk, and as a result of that, authentic, unusual voices or stories that that are unique are sort of getting lost, or are harder to sell than sort of more derivative works. I'm hoping that changes. We're seeing wonderful things happening, mainly from international territories, as we've seen with Squid Game and Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You and those types of shows. So hopefully international programmers will now push the envelope in us getting some better stuff on the air.
And then last question, and then I'll get you out of here. We've established that you have a long and successful and eclectic track record in quality storytelling. But if you could have dinner with one fictional character, who would it be and why?
This was a question that you had asked me. I knew you were going to ask me, and I said, "Oh my gosh."
Putting you on the spot to end it.
Well, I would say broadly any time traveling character. Let's say Sam Beckett from Quantum Leap or Doctor Who, to just discuss the moral and cultural dilemmas faced by humans in history and potentially in the future. I mean, given the state of the world today, it'd be fabulous to get some insights into whether we have or will we ever evolve morally and emotionally as a species. But failing having Sam Beckett at dinner, just having dinner with a conflicted megalomaniac like Bobby Axelrod from Billions or Roy Logan from Succession, I'll make do with them.
That is not only a strategic answer for getting a time traveler, particularly if it's one of my favorite doctors, I'm all on board because there's a few that I like more than others, but also a great one for entertainment purposes. I mean, sitting down to Logan Roy and just picking his brain, watching him go off would be a spectacle in and of itself.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I can tell you we're very eagerly excited for all that's to come from the Africa channel, and we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Brandon. Pleasure. Take care.
You.